Hey, this is Mike, Seder 42 Vinyl. I'm here with Roger again, and we are going to do Amplified Assignments. Episode
Sick.
continues. We continue to give each other records, and we continue to listen to them for about 2 weeks, and we continue to tell each other how we felt about them. This time we are doing, if you watch the end of the last video, we're doing non-metal this time. Normally up to this point we've been doing metal, kind of metal adjacent, heavier albums, but this time it's pretty much basically indie rock or folk music that we're doing this time around. The album that I gave Roger is Blonde Shell. This is a 2023 release that I kind of discovered and really enjoyed. So I wanted Roger to experience this album. And he gave me the Ballad of the Broken Seas, which is Isabel Campbell from Belle and Sebastian and Mark Lanigan from Screaming Trees fame. So we're going to discuss these albums. I've listened to my assignment quite a few times, probably about 10 or so times. I took a bunch of notes. This is a kind of a folk album that they did together. They each sing songs and they kind of sing together as well. Isabel Campbell, I think, wrote the majority of the songs. There's one cover song and one song I think that Mark Lanigan wrote as well. So I'm going to discuss that album first, and Roger is going to introduce that album right now and tell me kind of why he is into the album, why he likes it, and then why he wanted me to listen to it in particular for this amplified assignment.
Well, one, I thought I was pretty sure it was something you had never heard of, and two, I thought there was a good chance that you'd like it because I really like it a lot. I don't remember particularly how I came across it. It came out in 2006. I was familiar with both of them. I had been a Screaming Trees fan since the 90s, early 90s. I like Belle and Sebastian. I think by this point she had quit the band and was doing solo stuff, but she was on a couple of their albums, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s that I really liked. So I knew of both of them. I don't know why I picked it up, but I just immediately picked it up and I loved it. To me, it had a vibe of, there was an album in 1968 called Nancy and Lee that was Nancy Sinatra and Lee Hazelwood. And I've always really, really liked that album, and I like the vibe of that album. This album gave me that vibe right away. I love Mark's voice, and I think that's the reason Isabel Campbell wanted to make this album from what I've read about it. This whole collaboration was her idea. Mark is he's been in some rough places in life, and I think at some point I think she wanted to help him out and get him some recording. Unfortunately died a few years ago.
I didn't even know that he passed away.
Yeah, I believe he lived in Ireland the last few years of his life, and they said it was natural causes, which is very well possible, but he, did so much drugs and alcohol and, was in bad places a lot. So I don't think it was a really surprising thing. She actually wrote probably the most touching tribute of all, if you look it up, to him. It's really, really, really emotional and really nice. But anyway, that's how this album got on my radar. I immediately, really, really liked it. Played it nonstop. And again, it's one of those, I feel like this has been the last few that I've given you. Like, it's one of those albums that has just never gone away from me. Year doesn't go by where I don't listen to this album a few times. It's just really special to me. It's got a very cinematic feel to it. I think it's almost like a soundtrack to a movie that doesn't exist. A couple of the songs on there are some of my absolute favorite songs of all time. I would probably put the last song on there, The Circus is Leaving Town, my Hall of Fame song list. I have I have a list of things. This is kind of morbid, but I have a list of songs to play at my wake. Maybe we could do an episode about that. That is on my list. Also, Honey Child, What Can I Do? Almost as good. I think it's just such a lovely, lovely, lovely song. And, I love Mark's voice. Mark is one of my all-time favorite singers. It's unmistakable. I think he was really great. And I just wanted you to, hear it and see what you think, because I was curious, because like I said, I was guessing you never did, and it's something I really love. And I assume your first impressions going in were nothing, because this was new to you, but what did you think when I showed it to you?
Yeah, well, obviously it intrigued me. I saw the female on the cover and I was like, okay, that's cool. I'm a big fan of female artists, so that was intriguing to me immediately. Mark Lanigan, Screaming Trees, I'm familiar with that. I was familiar with his name. I wouldn't say that I was a huge fan of that band. Same thing with Belle and Sebastian. I was just I was really only aware of them. I never listened to that band really in any real way. So yeah, I was interested in this album. So my first impressions was I was thinking, okay, female vocals. And you mentioned it was, kind of like an acoustic album. I was assuming it was going to be something like that. So, and cinematic and all that stuff. It was intriguing. I was really intrigued. So I listened to the album several times. I will say that the album grew on me.
Okay.
I didn't warm to it immediately, and there's a few reasons for that, but it did grow on me after a lot of listens. And it is an album I think you got to put some time into it, but it depends on your taste in music. Like I want to say that folk music in general is not a genre that I have many albums, in that
Hmm.
genre. Like I have a Melanie record, this has a brand new key on it, so I love that song. I have a Frank album, of course. I
Album.
enjoy Frank. She's awesome. I have a Johnny Cash album, Destination Vic. This was actually given me by my mother-in-law. So, a bunch of train songs from Johnny Cash. And the one I think that kind of reminds me the most of this, or, is maybe most analogous, is Bobby John Tree, Ode to Billy Joe. This is a really good album. It's kind of a folk pop album, which is similar to what this is. I think there are some direct influences on a couple songs on this album directly from Bobby Gentry, and I'll talk about those songs. Folk music in general is not a genre that I'm attracted to a whole bunch. I know that you are. I know you're a fan of like Nick Drake, and Elliott Smith and things like that. I've never really got into that stuff, even after listening to it. I think I have to work at that a little bit more to enjoy that stuff because it's just not naturally interesting to me or fun to listen to for me. Some of it is, but most of it isn't. So this album was a bit of a challenge, kind of, because it's very, very traditional folk influenced. It's not, there are albums that are folky or have, our guitars and a singer, but folk, like traditional folk, is kind of different than that. But traditional folk music is a unique sound, I think, and its roots are in country and and a bunch of other different things. But yeah, so just to say basically that folk is not something that I buy a lot of and that I listen to enough to really appreciate. So this album was a little bit of a challenge, but like I said, it grew on me, but it took a little while for me to kind of warm up to it. But in the end, I'll spoil. I did like the album. I ended up buying a copy for myself. The funny thing is, like, I bought this like immediately after you talked about it. I was like, oh, this album is super intriguing. I'm probably really gonna like it. But yeah, so I listened to it a bunch, in the car, driving back and forth. You always talk about how you like to listen to stuff while you're in the pool. Well, I do that while I cut the lawn. I have my headphones on, and I'll be able to listen to basically a full, 30, 45-minute album while I'm cutting the lawn, and I get to kind of concentrate on the album and listen to it that way at least once every 2 weeks. But yeah, listening to it in the car back and forth. So anyway, this album did grow on me, and I would say that in the end I enjoyed it. The things that I noticed about this album, I think it's uses a lot of tropes of folk music. I would say that the album is not incredibly original. There's a cover on here. It's a Hank Williams cover, like a folk song that he kind of wrote. It's not incredibly memorable the first time you listen to it. When I think of certain albums, like Johnny Cash or stuff like that, you always have a song or two on there like, Walk the Line or Ring of Fire. You have those very memorable songs on there, or even Brand New Key for Melanie. Those songs kind of pop out. This album, to me, it took me a while to get to find the melodies and find the hooks and find the parts that I liked. And there was a lot of, I would just say that it's I don't want to say it's tropey, but it definitely has a lot of, I would say, typical melodies and rhythms or whatever that are in a lot of different folk songs and folk music. But after a while, like I said, I started to kind of enjoy it. The biggest draw for this album is the vocals. Mark Lanigan's vocals. I can't say they're unique because the very first thing I thought of when I heard the first song was Leonard Cohen. I was just like, oh my God, he sounds like almost exactly like Leonard Cohen. He's kind of channeling that a bit. And
The first song,
well,
most
his voice
definitely.
in
That's
general, I think, is, he sings in the same tone and the same timbre, kind of as Leonard Cohen. It just really, really reminded me of that, like right away. And that was kind of good because I kind of like some of that Leonard Cohen stuff, but only some of it. But I thought his voice is unique for this project, but I did enjoy it. And I also really enjoyed the contrast between their voices. Isabel's voice, very soft, very airy, it reminded me a little bit of Juliana Hatfield, kind of, because of they both have these very high, soft voices. but Julianne Hatfield's singing more in that over harder indie rock music, which I think is a good contrast there as well. But in this, it kind of fits the full, kind of soft melodies and tones that she's bringing to it. I enjoyed that as well. One thing I think that would be most interesting for people if they were getting into this album is if they were already familiar with like Lanigan or Campbell. Like if you were already a fan of one or both of them, I think this album is going to hit a lot easier and a lot faster because you're going to be excited about these two people getting together and writing music. Because I'm not a fan of either one of them, really, like I said, I was never really into either of their stuff individually. I'm just coming at it kind of cold, like, okay, this album has to impress me just by kind of on its own because they're kind of new artists to me in a way, But I think if you already have a connection to either one of these guys or both of them, I can imagine getting excited. So I think that would be more appealing if you're already a fan of either one of these guys. I think that it would be much more palatable to get into and easier to start liking it immediately. This album is really good. It grew on me after a while, and I will definitely be keeping it, and I will pull it out every once in a while as well. All right, so let's get into songs. Deus Ibi Est is, like I said, immediately I was reminded Leonard Cohen, like right away. I was like, oh, this could be even like a cover, really, because it has that even feel to it. Good song. I like the melody in it. It's a highlight on the album.
Impending storm, rise up, oh demons, I shall shame you. Down the barrel of my gun, and one by one I'll name you. Day on day my brothers leave, go marching off to war. Yet we never understand for what we're fighting for.
Black Mountain, I like the melody, the Are You True, over and over again. I enjoyed that. Yeah, and The False Husband, that song reminded me immediately of the Twin Peaks theme. Like it has that same guitar tone, that the Twin Peaks theme has. So I kind of enjoyed it because of that. And also that song, that is also a highlight because that's the song that most reminded me of Ode to Billie Joe. And the reason is because of the string arrangements that are in that song. Like if you listen to this song and then you listen to Ode to Billie Joe, I think you're going to be like, oh, wow, that is a direct influence there. It really just feels like it, whether it is or isn't. To my ears, it sounded very, very not like a copy and paste, but just incredibly influenced by that. So I think maybe it was like a Twin Peaks and a Ode to Billie Joe combination.
Where have you been, my darling?
Ballad of Broken Seas, I like it. I like the cello in it the best. That was kind of interesting part of that song. But other than that, it was just, I would say, average. Revolver, again, just incredibly traditional. It didn't sound that unique from a lot of different other folk songs. Ramblin' Man is the cover. It's a Hank Williams cover, so obviously that does sound a little dated, but updated with them singing. So it was also a good song. Do You Want to Come Walk With Me? It was a cute song, a little love song.
It almost feels like the interlude of the album to me.
Kind of, yeah, I would agree with that. It does, I believe, start the second side. So, and I would just say it's a cute song. It's very minimal. I think it's just the guitar and him singing and maybe her in the background a little bit.
She is back up, yeah.
Yeah, Saturday's Gone is a highlight for me. It's a Isabel song, and I really enjoyed that song because I like the melody in it. And I wrote down there's just this ba 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 melody. I can't remember why I wrote that down, but there's a part in there that I like. I think from the guitar, but again, it feels like it's something that I might have heard on another folk album. These songs are hard to be memorable for me because they just sound like other songs I've heard before, and I would say that's probably a negative for the album for me.
Isn't sure of her reflection at all? Is it just by all things past? Pleasure seeker of dejection, gaze into her looking glass. She may ask you what you believe, but the mirror doesn't see me. Saturday's gone. Saturday's gone. Saturday's gone. Saturday's gone.
There's another song, It's Hard to Kill a Bad Thing. This song is just a kind of an instrumental. It does have a good little melody, but since there's no singing, that's probably my least favorite song, even though the melody is good. And like you said, Honey Child, highlight of the album on side 2 especially. I really, really enjoyed that song.
I see you when you cast your spell. Babe, come and see about me, 'cause I'm feeling lonely. Maybe I'm stupid fool, chasing butterflies like you. On these days they seem so cruel, but honey child, what can I do?
Dusty Wreath that has that, I think it's Silent Night, is a little bit.
Yeah, it sounds like a music box almost.
But it's taking that Silent Night hook or whatever, or rhythm, to this, kind of Christmassy song. And Circus's Leaving Town, the lyrics are great on that song, but like I said, there's just an okay melody, and I like the organ a lot. There's organ in that song, so I thought that was really cool. But again, it just sounded like a traditional folk song to me. It didn't, it standed out for lyric-wise, but the melody and everything just sounded typical to me.
Remember that old song we had when we were young? Life was an empty page, the world would ride upon. You recall the meadow grass we sit and watch the hours pass. You were such a good girl then, no Ruby, dry your eyes. Circus is leaving town, no Ruby, roll your stockings down. Circus is leaving town, so Ruby, dry your eyes.
So there were definitely songs on here that I liked, and I liked the album overall. And I'm going to give this 3.5 out of 5
Excellent. Okay.
overall because I did enjoy it. It really kind of grew on me. Like I said, folk isn't a genre that I have a lot of and that I would go to and listen to frequently. So that was a little bit of a challenge for me, but there's enough on here that I like that, yeah, it's going to stay in my collection, and I enjoyed it. I don't think I enjoy it as much as you do, of course. And there's probably, we obviously have different tastes about folk music in particular.
This is interesting because I think once, and I don't want to like argue definitions really, but like what you said folk more than any time in that, I feel, in that review, and I never really thought of it in that way. And traditional folk, for me, traditional folk is more kind of your Greenwich Village in the 1960s, Phil Oakes, Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, early Dylan. That's traditional folk to me. But then, as you were saying it, and I was thinking about it as you were talking about it, like it also, I guess, is, I would say, more like an Appalachian folk, maybe more, which is kind of maybe more bluegrass adjacent, while not really being bluegrass. When you say folk and traditional folk right away, I was like, what? No. But when I started to think about it more, and I'm like, and expanded that world a little bit to more of the more country side, kind of folk, that, yeah, I can see that. And I think a part of that, and what your criticism is, and I think one of the things, as someone who is a fan of traditional folk music, I think one of the tenets of that genre is that you keep songs going forever. Like repetition in songs, you keep songs alive. If you go to a real folk artist is almost like a busker. They're going to play cover songs because cover songs are what a folk singer does. Like you sing the songs and then you add your own in, or you only do your own, or you mix it up. And I think folk, from that element in some of the things you say, I'm like, oh yeah, I see what you're saying. But I'm also like, I think that's what traditional folk is reusing and just keeping the spirit of the genre in the songs alive. So that's interesting. Yeah, that's cool. I'm glad you like it. They have 2 others they recorded together. I would at least give them a listen.
Yeah, overall on the internet, it gets really good reviews. People like it. It's definitely not a divisive album in any way. All right, so that's what I think of this album.
Okay.
And now we're going to go into discussing my amplified assignment that I gave Roger, and that is going to be the Blondshell release, the self-titled debut full-length studio album from her. She had a kind of an album before this that was kind of like a pop album that didn't really do anything. I feel like that wasn't necessarily her passion, but she was just trying to break into the music industry. And then she's, like I talk about artists, who kind of start doing their own thing. They're like, I just want to do my own thing and just see what happens. So I feel like that's what this album is, because it's a very personal album. She sings a lot about her personal struggles on this album, and I feel that it's a strong indie rock release, in my opinion, for a modern indie rock release. It really brings me back to, the 90s and stuff, where I listen to a lot of artists like this. All right, Roger, what was your preconceived notions or first impressions after I showed this album and assigned it to you to listen to for this past week, or past 2 weeks?
I had never heard of it. So that's the beginning and the end of it. So it didn't really mean anything to me. You did mention in your intro that you heard of her because she opened for Liz Phair.
Yes.
I will say briefly, and I think this is relevant to later on, Liz Phair, I remember when Exile in Guyville came out, and nearly every friend of mine loved it. Like, it was hailed as album of the year. I tried so hard with that record, and I found it so completely uninteresting. I found it just really, really boring, and it did nothing for me. I've heard songs from her after that here and there, but I never really gave it much of a listen, because if I didn't like that, it's not my thing. So that wasn't really a first impression, but just that's what you said. My first impression was really nothing. This review is going to be a little different. And this is based on, how the evolution I've gone through listening to this in the last couple weeks. So my favorite thing about this album, it's 9 songs in 32 minutes. And I'm not going to trash this album. I'm really not. Like, that is not my intention here. Really, a lot of this was just like, I didn't understand why I was listening to this. This just didn't really seem for me. at all. That was definitely the first time I listened to it. I don't know if I even got through it. And I think the first week it was a struggle to get through it a few times because I was just like, it didn't seem like an album that is for me. I am in my 50s, and I don't have any children. I have a niece who's 23 years old. I'm very close with her. We talk all the time, and she talks about her life to me, and her life is another universe to me. And like, she lives in a different reality than me, and I'm okay with that. Like, I love her. We get along great. I listen to her. I try to understand the best as I can. Her culture is not my culture. And, so I think when I was listening to this at first, I was just like, it seemed so foreign to me. It seemed very modern to me. It just seemed like a modern pop album to me. It seemed just like something that I would hear on the radio on a top 40 station based on my very, very limited and probably wrong understanding of pop culture today as a 50-something-year-old white dude. So I didn't dislike this. So at some point, I think this is a fun story as well. And kind of relative, because I think this is, like I said, this is a different type of review because I really don't feel qualified to review this. I will give some thoughts on some songs. I don't feel qualified to review this. At one point when I was listening to it early on and I was frustrated, I was just like, why did he assign this to me? Did he think I'd like this? Wow. I don't understand why he assigned this to me. He should have just assigned to me Liz Phair record. I'm like, I would have gave that a listen. And then I had this light bulb above my head that I would do this kind of pro wrestling kind of heel turn in the middle of this and suddenly like give you a review of Exile in Guyville instead, is what I thought I would do. I was like, I've turned the table and I've decided for you that this is what I'm going to review. But I tried listening to Exile in Guyville and I couldn't get through it because I was so bored and uninterested in it. And you know what? It shared some similar vibes to this record. So I'm interested. So your take on this album is interesting to me. How you describe it to me is interesting. This is an honest question. And again, I'm not hating on this. But I want to hear you expand a little bit on why you thought I would like this.
The main reason, I guess, and maybe it is a miss on my part, but to me, this album reminds me of the 90s, and it does remind me of Liz Phair and Juliana Hatfield and a lot of the female artists that I really, really liked back then. So this is kind of not necessarily nostalgia, but to me, it is a modern take on those artists and that music. So I enjoy a lot of female artists for some reason. I don't know why. One of the things I've thought about, I have introspected about that a little bit. And, I never had male influences in my life, really at all. The only male influences I've had in my life growing up would be, you guys, my friends, you and Brian. And
we were not men.
And your lives having a dad is completely foreign to me. Like that is not something that I ever experienced. And all of my family members, my mother, my grandmother, and all four of my cousins, they are all female. So I don't know if that puts me in a unique situation where, all of my formative years from, 0 to, 15, 16, whatever, where, you start finding your own way. I was just wired to, I guess, understand or sympathize or empathize with the female perspective of life in general, with my mom, my grandmother, and all of my cousins and my aunt. And my aunt was divorced when I was really, really young. So I never really knew, my uncle or whatever, whatever he is, her ex-husband, so he was never really an influence in my life at all. I had a neighbor across the street who was maybe like 5 or so years older than me. And, he introduced me to like the Doors, the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Def Leppard, I hung out with him a little bit. So I got influence of music from him. But I guess in general, for the most part, my upbringing has been very female centric. I like a lot of modern pop music too. I have the Chaperone record. I like the new Lady Gaga record. I am into modern pop music to an extent. I don't like everything, but there are things that pop out to me that I really enjoy and I get into. And when artists like this come out, and Liz Phair, I can't relate or understand or comprehend why somebody would think that album is boring. Like that just does not click with me. Now, not to say that it isn't boring to you. I'm not saying that you're wrong.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair.
But when you say that, it's like you're speaking a language that I do not understand.
Yep,
It's like
that's-
I don't get it.
That's okay.
Because that album is like it had what a 30th anniversary where it had a box set. You know, I mean, it's a revered album in the indie rock scene. So it's not just me, is why I'm saying that. It's an album that is revered by a lot of people, and maybe more so on the female side of fandom.
I don't know. Every dude I knew loved that record. And like, I'm not disagreeing with the public consensus. I thought that was an interesting parallel that you said that and my subsequent feeling about it, because I'm just like, it's something that it just doesn't click with me at all. You know, I read some of the reviews about it. I was very interested in it. Obviously, I got a lot of really glowing reviews. And I also just didn't understand a lot of the reviews with people saying it was not what you said, 90s alternative. And I'm like, I don't hear that. Like, I don't hear that at all. I laughed at the word grunge was said, and you talked about grunge in your review, but like, so I heard people call it that, and I just was like, yeah, that doesn't even mean anything. What does grunge mean? Like, you know, so for me it means like, you know, aggressive fuzzy guitar alt rock, you know, is what it means to me. But you know, and I saw like people comparing her to artists that like, you know, I'm super into. People were comparing her to Patti Smith and PJ Harvey and Kathleen Hanna, and I was just like, my eyes were wide, and I was just like, I don't get this. Like, I am not hearing that at all. This sounds like just modern pop to me. So I took notes on a lot of the songs. They're not really good notes. The first couple songs, I almost feel like they're the two shortest songs. They're like, you know, a couple minutes a pop, and like there are songs that I feel are both like missed potential. I feel like they both start like, I'm like, okay, this doesn't suck. This is meh, all right. And then it just ends. And I'm just like, oh, you know, Olympus I thought it was pretty mellow and it was okay.
Can't get through winter at your house. Sweat out the drugs all through the summer. Let my heart sleep in the gutter. Wish I remember when we kissed, but now it's faded. 'Cause I always just replayed it till it left. I wanna save myself, you're part of my addiction. I just keep you in the kitchen while I burn. Baby, wanna race this, you're not shameless. I'm afraid of your description that I'm fitting when I'm faded. I'm alone when I live in your house. When I sleep, I live in your house. Getting the bends and I'm scared of it now. Hate myself 'cause I always slack out.
Salad, a lot of the vocals I did not like with her. A lot of it, and again, that's what it also made me feel like talking to someone in their 20s. Like it was a lot of just that lazy talking half the time. And that's what I feel like I hear when I'm talking to my niece and her friends. Like they all talk in a kind of just like a goofy, annoying cadence to me. And like when a lot of her vocals are just, she gets into that like kind of just talking, singing. And that I just don't really like.
And she took him to the courthouse and somehow he got off. Then I saw him laughing with his lawyer in the parking lot. It wouldn't be so bad, it wouldn't hurt like this. Look what you did, you make a killer of a pacifist. It doesn't happen to women I know. following him. Gonna make it hurt, gonna make it hurt. But I don't know how to do that within the framework, 'cause we were never violent. Gonna get me, I'm so scary, I can't stop having visions of following him. Gonna make it hurt, but I don't know how to do that within the framework, 'cause we were never violent.
Sepsis. I like the first minute, I was like, oh, this is a good song. And then it just like went off the rails. I really didn't like it after that. Sober Together was okay. Joiner, kind of the same thing with the talk singing at the end. I really didn't like. Maybe my favorite song was like the last song on the album. I thought it had a nice vibe to it. I liked the really simple, repetitive guitar, like chord just in a row, a little like it was like 3 notes or something. It just kind of had a nice repetitive droning.
And I think I believe in getting saved, not by Jesus' validation, but some dude's gaze. And I think I believe in getting saved. Holy water, pull my hair right from the base. It should take a whole lot to turn me off, to turn me up. And it should take a whole lot to turn me off. I'm gonna find a cure. And it's so dangerous, forming an attachment to something. Know that every time I love it might pull the rug out, and I know when I leave the house, anything can take me down. Anything can take me down. Anything can take me down.
I would try to listen to this from a couple aspects. One, just being like, oh, well, let me just try to give this a review. And I'm like, vocals, I wasn't really a big fan of the vocals. I think when they're good, they're just okay. I don't like kind of the way she does. Like I said, it's almost just like a lazy talking half the time. The music I thought was very droning and mellow and more reminded me of like shoegazy Britpop type stuff, but even more low key. Like it seemed very modern to me in that regard. The lyrics, people talked about the lyrics as a plus. Obviously the way she sings, it's easy to understand. So I picked up on them in a lot of the listens, but I gave it one listen with it in front of me, reading along with them. That is really, I feel, what epitomizes like, this is just not for me. This is someone who is in, 2 generations down from me, talking about their 20-something drug habits and sexcapades. And I'm just like, this isn't a judgment, but for me, I'm just kind of like, it makes me make a kind of a cringe face. And for me, it's just not something that is for me.
Palm in palm, it turns me on when you tell me you're not going away. Kiss City, just look me in the eye, and I swear I'll listen. Do what you wanna do.
So I don't want to give this, I almost want to give this an NA as a review. Like it, but that seems unfair. You know, maybe I'll just give it 2 stars because it wasn't necessarily unpleasant. The first couple times I just was kind of annoyed more because I just was like, why? But once I got over that, so then I gave it more of a try. And I will say I found it less bothersome as I went on. You know, I found it like, this is all right. And I think, you know, as you and I discussed, I think our goal is to not give bad shit to each other because it's not my goal to shit on things. And I think some of the things that I realized with our discussion last night, which made me change the tone of this entirely. Like, I think this was gonna be a little more negative because I am, I guess, a little pickier. And I think I enjoy negativity a little more than you. You know, I think that, you know, and that's what I've realized. And I need to be respectful of that as well. Like, I enjoy shit talking. Like, I think that's fun. Like, I don't take it personally. Like, when you like hated introduce yourself in the last episode, like, I found that incredibly amusing. I enjoyed that segment so much because like it was an honest take from you, but I found it very amusing. I was amused during that, like very much. But that's me, and I think I have to respect that you don't have maybe those same qualities. So I've said before, we're not album reviewers. We're not journalists. You know, I'm learning a little bit about how to give opinions better with this. So
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, I don't know, your take on, I guess let's start with the lyrics, I guess, because, you know, yeah, maybe, you know, we weren't into drugs when we were younger, or maybe, you know, we didn't have, you know, codependent relationships when we were younger. But I don't think that that's such a foreign thing that it's a generational, like a 50-year-old or whatever can't relate to that in some way. And I think that if we dived into lyrics of bands that we like today, we're going to find that they're talking about the same shit. I really honestly don't think that artists in 2025 that are 25 years old are singing about stuff that much different than they were in the 90s when we were
well,
20.
you know what? No, you're right. Like, I think it's just personal for me that hearing those type of feelings from it, like when I'm talking to my niece, I don't want to hear her talk about that. But it's just at this point in my life, you know, knowing that this is new and modern and hearing those intimate thoughts just kind of doesn't really sit well with me. And that may be just me, a weird tick that I have.
I mean, I have not thought about this way. I don't know. I guess I just don't feel that way about the music.
So I don't know. Again, this is a lot of projecting by me.
I find it interesting. Like, I don't understand what's creepy about it.
Yeah.
I guess is what I don't get. I mean, it's not even, and it's not even that a 50-year-old couldn't experience codependent relationships and drugs in their life.
Yeah.
You know, I don't understand why that's a 25-year-old thing and why it's being framed in a way that because it's coming from a female perspective who is that age, I don't want to hear it coming from that person. But if a Mark Lanigan talked about his drug use and his codependent relationships in a folk song, that's cool. I'm okay with that.
No, I don't think it's a gender thing because I get where you're going with that.
But I'm
And,
just
like,
wondering why
I think it,
it's a thing.
but at this age, if I heard like a 25-year-old male artist talking about, you know, his womanizing and his drug use and stuff like that, like that would not sit well with me. I'm just, you know, that either. Like that would also just like make me feel kind of uncomfortable as a middle-aged dude. So, and I'm not, again,
Interesting.
this is a meism. I don't know, man. This is just
I don't
something that
know. I mean,
I
but-
want to say for clarity that I think because I talked about this last and expanded on it the most, we're making the biggest deal about this and my feelings towards this album, and I don't want that to overshadow. Like, I think I just was going through. I wanted to like talk about 3 phases of it. You know, the singing, the music, and the lyrics, and I ended on the lyrics and I expanded on that. But I don't want to act like that's the dominant reason because it really isn't. It's actually like probably the smallest of the two. You know, it's maybe 20%, 40-40, you know, for me more than anything. So I'm not, you know, upset in this discussion with it, but I'm saying like I don't want it to dominate that that's how I felt about it. It wasn't why it didn't do anything for me. I think mostly it was the vibe of the album. It did seem very modern pop to me. That's my main feelings towards it. So I want to just make that clear. Like that's
interesting. I was not expecting that type of review or that type of response to the album, obviously.
Yeah.
Because I did assign it to you. Like I said, when I hear this album, it brings me right back to the 90s, you know, to like I said, Juliana Hatfield, to even Liz Phair, and those albums still resonate with me today.
Well, you know what? To your point, 2 artists I never listened to.
Yeah,
So-
and I guess you are the wrong audience for this album. You could give it a NA or a 0 stars or whatever, not applicable to Roger, because I think that makes more sense.
Yeah.
I find your reasoning fascinating to me, and maybe I'm weird for enjoying this band and enjoying this type of music, because that is kind of how you're making me feel about it. But some strong takes there about
and I was trying to make
why I shouldn't like this album.
no. And I wasn't, I was trying to take it from a thoughtful standpoint to not be
Well,
like that way.
the things that are resonating with me are, I feel weird being a 50-year-old guy being assigned this album, listening to it. It's too intimate. It's too young. I feel like she's a child. That is, I don't want to say triggering language, but it's like,
Yeah, and I
it's
apologize.
it's strong language, but I am not sure if you're wrong. I don't know. Maybe it is creepy for me to listen to this music, but I can't imagine that a lot of these reviewers who are writing reviews for this album aren't, maybe not my age exactly, but I'm sure there are older. I feel really weird about liking this album now.
I read a bunch of reviews and I don't know who any of the reviewers are. And I wondered that at some point. I'm like, how old are you? Is what I wondered. Like, because when they said it sounds like the 90s, I was like, were you born in the 90s? Is what I was thinking. And this is just what you think the 90s was like, but you hear it. So I'm not going to completely dismiss it.
I'm not the only one either. Having the show and having these discussions is kind of fascinating, because, and I mentioned this in our chat yesterday, it's like, I feel like we're not hearing the same thing. It's almost like you're colorblind and I'm seeing in color, or opposite, right? Like one of us is seeing the world while hearing these songs in a completely different way than the other one is. It's almost like you're seeing different colors than I am, and you can't describe a color to me because it doesn't make sense. And you're describing, I'm like, no, that's not what it looks like. And you're like, no, that is what it looks like. And I'm like, okay, whatever, that's weird. But so it's interesting to me, like, yeah, I just kind of feel like we're not hearing the same thing. I also want to say that I get validated when I do read the reviews that, reflect my impression, because it makes me think, okay, I'm not crazy, right? And that's one of the reasons I read reviews. It's not necessarily to say, oh, am I supposed to like this album or not? But I like to understand, like, am I having a common experience that other people are having, And I think that's reflected in the reviews, that my experience of the album is very similar to most people who hear it.
Dude, I couldn't find a bad review of this record.
I can't say that you're not hearing what you're hearing and your feelings are invalid, because they're not.
No.
But I just don't know. I can't, I'm having trouble computing with, it's not, it doesn't register with me the same way it registers with you, which is fascinating. So anyway, I think it's interesting. I think this was definitely interesting. I've learned a lot about your taste. I really think that it's going to be a struggle for me to present, unless they are older artists, maybe modern music.
You know what?
To bring,
I would probably,
except for maybe metal music,
Yeah, I've never really framed it that way, but I think you might be right. I think outside of metal, I don't think there's much modern that I'm really even interested in liking.
Maybe it really isn't me. I mean, because you did kind of, and I'll be honest with you, the way that you described you listening to this album, it made me feel like maybe I'm weird, maybe there's something wrong with me for being interested in these artists, but maybe it really isn't me. Maybe it is more you. In a way that it's, because you feel weird about it. Until today, I did not feel weird for loving this album. And I won't say I understand everything that she's going through, because I was never into drugs, and, I don't believe I was in a codependent relationship, but it's still interesting to me. And 25-year-olds' lives, I don't want to be a part of their lives necessarily, but I am still interested in that stuff.
I can do that with metal. Maybe I'm just like old and lazy and that's my comfort zone, but
yeah, I don't know.
It's always weird to me that like you almost consider female a genre. That's always been weird to me. Like, and that's what I've never been able to like connect the dots. Like that's always seemed so strange to me, because I don't dislike female artists. I have I don't dislike bands fronted by females. Like I don't like, I like, my collection stands on its own, and I'm not speaking for you. I feel like you look at it as a genre almost, or like not a genre, but like an overall category, where I don't look at it as a category.
All right. So why do I feel like female artists are a genre? And I do kind of feel that way. Part of it is, like I explained already, how I grew up being around, females my whole life, really only growing up with that perspective. And the men that came into my life, through my mom's boyfriends and things like that, it was never really a good experience. So, there was always, I don't know, just distance of the male perspective in my life. I think that's part of why I still relate to maybe younger artists that are female. And I do believe that female artists are a genre. And maybe it's just female artists in general. It's not necessarily a type of music, but just music from the female perspective. Because, like, if you think about it, there are no books about men in rock music, or the men in, heavy metal, or the men in the punk scene. But there are a lot of books about the female experience in the punk scene. Not biographies about bands, but
No.
as a collective, a woman's experience in music and in genre, especially in genre, metal in particular, punk, where they are way more male dominated than pop music, is an interesting perspective, and it's different. And I do feel that it comes out in the music, even if they are writing songs and specifically labeled into a specific genre type. And for me, I can't, like I said, I don't go to therapy, so I don't know why, but I get more invested and I feel more emotion when I hear lyrics, singing. Sometimes it doesn't even have to be lyrics. It can just be a melody sung by a woman instead of a man. And it hits me in certain ways. I don't know what that is inside my brain, that makes that happen. I could only really equate it to something like ASMR. Some people hear certain things or sounds and it literally makes hair on their head go up and makes their brain tingle. That doesn't happen when everybody listens to the same sound, the exact same sound. It doesn't happen for me. But when I hear female vocals in a certain way, that kind of happens with me. So for me, it just sounds different, and I think lyrical content is different a lot of times. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it overlaps, but I don't know. I just think it is different. And I guess that's the only way that I can really explain it,
No, and I can't argue with what you said about, the perspectives and the fact that there isn't stories about one and there's stories about the other. Like, no, I get that.
Yeah, and there's aesthetics to it too, right? What's pleasant to your ear. I don't know. I guess that's why it's interesting to me about the Blonde Shell, where it becomes, and maybe, this isn't what you meant, but like, I don't understand it because I'm older and, she's younger and all that stuff. I don't know that I see it in the same way or feel it in the same way. But I'm not discounting that you feel it that way, but I'm just saying I'm having trouble reconciling that argument, or that not necessarily.
No, and I thought that. I considered that. I was like, am I only having this thoughts about being uncomfortable about this because she's a woman? And like, if this was a dude saying the same things, would I have the same things? Those thoughts went through my head and I considered it. And I guess I don't really know the answers to that, but I ultimately said that I, just said to myself that I don't think that that's a factor. But,
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah, I'm not saying you're wrong. We're just, having a conversation.
I definitely considered that for sure. And that's not my intent to do that at all.
Yeah.
Like, for sure.
Okay. All right. So, Amplified Assignments, episode
7.
I'm going to give you this album, and I'm not going to purposefully just not going to give you context. I want to do this just as an experiment or whatever. I'll tell you a couple things, but I just kind of want you to experience this album without me saying anything about the
Okay.
music, about how I feel about it, about anything, about what genre I think it is, nothing.
Okay.
This is my coup de grace. Because this is a band that has one album. They were way ahead of their time in a way, and I think Coup de Grace kind of was as well in some respect. And they made one album and then they dropped off the face of the earth. But I will say, I'm only giving this to you obviously because I love this album. I think it's great. It was a new discovery for me when I was deep diving into a particular genre and I was buying a bunch of albums. And this is the band called Bleached Black. This album cover is awful. and it
Yeah.
doesn't give you any hints about what the album is about. It's almost like to me right now, it looks like an advertisement for cigarettes, like I could see Marlboro
Yeah.
up here or something because the
Yeah.
cigarettes are here.
Yeah.
You
Alive
know,
with pleasure.
yeah, exactly. It's a self-titled album, three dudes.
Okay.
And it's from 1987. Keep that in
Okay.
mind when you're listening to it
Okay.
because I feel that this album is ahead of its time of almost 5 years. Probably 3 to 5 years, this album might have been bigger or might have hit or might have been fit into, I guess I'll say, into the 90s a bit more than it did the late 80s.
Okay.
Bleach Black is your amplified assignment. It is on Amazon playlist, so you'll be able to find it. Yeah, good album. Great album.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. So check it out. That's your amplified assignment.
I had two decisions. I'm going to go in the spirit of trying to match that more.
Okay.
Even though this is an album from 2000. Bernie approves. Don't you, Bern? You're going to be familiar. You may have listened to this before. You don't own it. It maybe is unofficially the sixth Urge Overkill album. And it is the solo album from Nash Cato called
Interesting.
Debutante.
Interesting.
This, like I said, came out in 2000. I don't have to give you a whole lot of context because I know you're familiar with Urge Overkill. This came out 5 years after Exit the Dragon. Half of the songs were co-written by Blackie Onassis, who was in Urge Overkill at the time. This was originally supposed to be an Urge Overkill album, and then it just all fell apart and Nash went solo. If this was an Urge Overkill record, and you know I'm a huge Urge Overkill fan, like huge fan. This is a top 3 record of theirs if this was an album of theirs. And that says a lot to me considering how I feel about Supersonic Storybook, Saturation, and Rock and Roll Submarine, which I think was the album of the year when it came out. Like, I think it goes on a few songs longer than it should be, but I think just, we're talking about pop, we're talking about rock, we're talking about just swagger. I think, with Urge Overkill, some of the songs were Nash songs, some of the songs were King songs, and the Nash songs always had a little bit more kind of sneer to them. This is a whole album of that. So
All right.
That's all I'll say.
I like the idea of a Urge Overkill album that isn't an Urge Overkill album because I do like Urge Overkill a lot. All right, cool. I think this is interesting. I think that our picks are similar in a kind of way. Or these two bands probably don't sound exactly the same, but they are probably within the same, I don't know, maybe genre type category.
Okay.
All right, so that is the end of episode
6.
Our very special episode is what we're going to call it now.
It's so special it includes a dog.
That's right. Like, subscribe, comment, and then we will bring more dogs on the channel if you do that. Well, if you made it this far into the video,
It's a country dog jamboree.
you got to see 2 puppies. She's still a puppy, aren't you? See, I'm still a puppy. 17-year-old Lyra. It's going to be all right.
Bernie wants to get back to the chair behind me so bad so he can go back to sleep. He's a 7-year-old dachshund mix. All right, Bern. There he will look. He will look at me and go, "Papa, what'd you do that to me? I'm out of here."
All right. So if you stayed, you got to see that. That's awesome.
Yep.
Like, subscribe, comment. Let us know about this episode and if anybody has any opinions about it. My review was pretty straightforward. Roger's review, that took us down a path.
Yeah.
That was interesting conversation.
Yeah. All right. Take it easy, everybody.
Cool. Thanks.